Continuing from the previous lesson, we're going to keep using Realflow to simulate water filling up a small glass. So this lesson will deal primarily with just the rough particle motion, and then for the next several lessons we'll keep refining this down until we get something that's much more water-like. So here's where we left off in the previous lesson. And one thing that I do want to touch on before we get too much further into this entire simulation is one thing you've noticed, if you're probably following along with me, is that having to re-simulate these particles every single time can really get to be time-consuming and can really get to be sort of a pain. So every time you actually want to be able to rewind and go back to the beginning of your simulation, you have to re-simulate these particles every single time. Well, what if we don't want to be able to do that? What if we just want to be able to cache these particles so that Realflow can remember that? Here's where something called the Export Central comes into play. Now, if you look at the Export Central, it's pretty straightforward. You have all of the objects that are currently in your scene, and then you can turn on what you actually want Realflow to export. And I'll kind of explain here in just a second exactly what is going on here. So let's say, for example, that I want to be able to turn on my Circle 1 emitter to be exported. So I go ahead and just turn on the checkbox, close this dialog box, and now if you look really closely, you can see in the upper corner of my timeline there's this little blue box. Okay, now if I go back and re-simulate this, you'll also see now that I've turned this on in the Export Central, now I have this little peach area that's filling up my timeline as this slider moves forward. So a couple of things that you can see have changed, and I'll let this simulate for just a few more minutes longer and kind of show you exactly what Realflow is doing behind the scenes. So let me go ahead and stop this. Now that this has been exported, I can actually now click and drag and scrub my slider and see this particle simulation taking place. So why is that? Why is Realflow now able to remember this? Well, if you take a look in your Realflow Basics folder, or whatever you set for your project, if you take a look in the particles folder that was generated, there are actually now these individual files. This is what Realflow is referring back to whenever we're scrubbing. So what we're basically seeing is sort of like an image sequence, except it's using a particle sequence. So for every single frame, it's loading up one of these bin files that have already been cached. And that is, again, kind of going back to the first lesson where I said that setting up your whole project is pretty important for that reason. So I'm going to go ahead and restart this. Now, whenever you hit your reset button, it will go ahead and reset everything. So I can't scrub anymore. So be aware of that. Anytime you hit this reset, all this cached data that you just cached kind of goes out the window. So I'm going to go ahead and simulate this real quick. Okay, so now that I've simulated this, now for visualization's sake, this is much better because now I can just simply scrub in my timeline and watch this particle simulation as it happens, because now, like I said, it's actually referring back to these individual files for each frame. So that makes it much easier for us to now visualize this and be able to see this movement. So the movement that we have is not too bad at the moment. We have this water that's falling down, and it actually is able to behave pretty realistically on its own. So it hits this corner of the glass, begins to splash around, and then you can see where it meets up, where these two waves meet up in the back of the glass, and then they start to splash together, and then they fly up. At this point, though, it starts to get a little bit out of hand because now we've got this wave that's splashing out of the back of the glass. So let's see what we can do to be able to sort of tame this down a little bit. So let's go ahead and take this viscosity down a little bit. By default, it's going to be set to 3, which in some cases, and in probably most cases, can probably get you by, depending on what sort of a liquid you're wanting to simulate. But let's go ahead and take this viscosity down to something like 1, which should hopefully give us now a much thinner type of a liquid. So I'm going to go ahead and reset this and resimulate. Okay, so that maybe helped a little bit. It didn't really help so much with the actual wave that's coming up around the backside of the glass, but you can see when I play this through, now we do have something that's definitely a little thinner looking. So as this splashes around, we definitely have much more vibrant splashes than what we had before because this isn't so much of a viscous fluid, so these particles aren't trying to stick together quite so much. But let's go ahead and make a few more changes to this. I'm going to go ahead and let's lower the internal and the external pressure on this. Let's try a really low number, like something 0.0001. Okay, now we hopefully won't have so much pressure that's trying to push these particles back up internally. Now that we've lowered this number, we can also take this density down quite a bit. So let's try maybe something like 20. Now that we've lowered this internal and external pressure, now lowering this density won't cause these particles to just completely blow apart. So I'm going to go ahead and resimulate this. So now that we've actually lowered this pressure, now we do have something that's a little bit more stable, I guess you could say. When I play this back, you can see that we don't have quite so much of a plume that's actually flying up. And we do have, when you take a look at the actual particles around in this area, we do have particles that are quite a bit thinner. So we have a pretty thin amount of particles that are coming up the side because, number one, we've lowered the density, and number two, we've actually managed to lower this internal and external pressure. So we have something that's much more thin looking, sort of like what you would expect to get with water. So in the next lesson, we'll keep refining this water simulation.